Welcome, welcome once again to your Astrology for Business class number 5 on your magnetic marketing map. I'm very excited about this particular class. It really has been one of the key reasons that I feel I have been guided to do this course in the first place, and really it is my passion, perhaps because of my North Node in the 3rd, and also I have Neptune there, so it gives me access to, I feel like, a lot of information that just keeps coming in on a regular basis, and because I have a North Node there, it's a big part of my purpose is wrapped in with it. So nonetheless, a very important area to be understanding and really aligning with its highest expression in our chart, the so-called 3rd house. I like to call it the 3rd house of highest coherence and your message credibility, oftentimes referred to as the house of communication. Okay, and more things that we're going to talk about today. So welcome. Let's get started. And okay, fantastic. So here we go, class number 5, magnetic marketing map. So what we're going to be covering today is, first of all, I'm going to include, or really second of all, to be more precise, I am going to be including one of the techniques or really concepts in astrology referred to as planetary aspects. If you have studied with me before, or if you have studied on your own, then you are likely already familiar with aspects. If not, these are angular relationships between planets, so basically the distances between the planets that are not accidental, and so we seek to understand, why, for example, when we have sun and the moon close together, how do they work together, and or when they are in a certain or distance from each other, and then pretty much any other planet in relationship to all really 10 planets that we primarily use. Now, in addition to that, we are referring here periodically to Chiron as well, okay, as one of the so-called planetoids, or actually more precisely called asteroid. Okay, so with that said, I'm gonna introduce the concept of aspects, and then we're gonna, in the following or the last 2 class videos, we're going to see that more in application. So today, magnetic marketing, a language map. So we're going to talk about building your message credibility and how the 3rd house is very important here, and then also how the 10th house needs to interact and play into this, and how are the 3rd and the 10th very important in terms of our highest alignment in my experience, and probably one of the 2 areas that I find most of the people that I advise, most of my clients, and even a lot of people that I see in public and in media, when they get into some sort of critical, let's say a challenge or even a credibility dilemma or a crisis, or like, it really leads back to this, either 3rd house or 10th house. As you can imagine, naturally 10th house would have to do with accountability, also our highest potential, but the 3rd is really where we need to get clear. And in my experience, really, when we say people who are just somehow lucky or have a more of a way of communicating their message, or just being understood, or a lot of that stuff that I find, until we really, either unless we have a natural gift there, and many people do, the chances are, if you are listening to this class video, the chances are that you have a natural gift there. Having said that, in my experience, it's the 1st and the 2nd house that seem to come more naturally to us, in particular the 2nd, and we talked about that because it's the gifts that we can rely on. The first, I would say then, would be probably the 2nd one. So the first house would be the second one in terms of if I were to rank areas in our chart in terms of our familiarity with them. I will periodically find people with certain signatures that are struggling to really embody the energy of that first house as well, and which is why I always teach it as something that we need to seek to embody more, to consciously keep it in mind. The second, again, I find we can more easily connect with. And then the third is a very, very interesting one. So we're going to learn how important it is to be as coherent as we can be in that area, and then how it really connects to other areas in our chart, including the 7th, the 10th, and the 1st in particular. So how to be clear, consistent, and relevant in our soul-aligned and compelling marketing message. This is going to be, we're going to start with this today, and then really we're going to deepen this in the last 2 classes in a recap of what we have been covering. Okay, so we have 2 more videos and classes after this one. So in the next week class, we're going to be putting together what we have already, and hopefully you have come up with at least at some fundamental level of understanding. Okay, this is going to deepen and evolve continually throughout your life. Like, you're not meant to master this right away. It just would not be really possible. But really, these are the keys that I'm so passionate to share with you and show you, where to look in the chart, where to focus in. If you are looking to be an influencer, whether it's in social media, the chances are more likely that is where you would be drawn to, but it could be, in some other ways as well, written media and so on and so forth. So we're going to be talking about the quarterly marketing plan and your social media engagement keys, putting that together and really highlighting that, and very importantly, coming up with that plan, and so that you can actually have some consistency in knowing what to pay attention to, and forget about all the other stuff where maybe you have been comparing yourself to other people and wondering, why does this work for them, and maybe I should do something like that, and really knowing what you are meant to be aligning with, because your rising sign, right, as we have learned, your 2nd house and your 3rd house, very important in terms of communication, the chances are is going to be different than many of the people out there that you may be comparing yourself to. Having said that, those that you are meant to learn from as well, and we all have people obviously that we're looking up to, are going to be in some way likely bringing to maybe a deeper embodiment or a deeper insight for you some of these energies that you may be, in particularly either strong in or even struggling with, in particularly the 3rd house or even 10th house, and so on, or maybe your sun in particular, and or the North Node, right? The Moon is also where we have more comfort, and obviously the South Node, so we're going to be putting that together, and then in the very last class of the course, we're going to be taking that to another level, and talking about really sort of a summary of how to emerge as a leading voice in your niche or your niche, and also some daily habits for success. Okay, so ta-da. With that said, here's a little bit of a intro and a guideline, if you'd like, a slide on different meanings of 3rd house. Now, I'm not going to go into detail into all of them right now, because I have several of these ways that I want to, and a little bit of repetitiveness here to kind of bring some of these important concepts, hopefully, home today. And so, as I mentioned, yes, while we can even place different body parts into 3rd house, and for even different rooms in our home, for different purposes in astrology, by the way. For example, in astrology and healing, obviously different body parts would be important, but when looking at the 3rd house, different rooms in our house, this is for different also astrology fields, for example, when we're looking for lost objects and things like that. But it also is interesting to notice, even based on your natal chart, some of these tidbits. So, house of communication, known as the house of siblings and relatives, short trips, and you can think of it as a very, bottom line, very busy, one of the busiest areas of our chart. There's a lot of chit chat here. There's a lot of talking. There's a lot of writing for some of us. There's a lot of teaching, communicating with our relatives, our siblings, for example. You know, it's not accidental that the siblings belong in the third house because in most cases, those would be the first people, if not even the people that we spend the most of our time communicating with, perhaps even more than our parents. Okay, so it's not accidental that it is, and by the way, cousins as well belong here. So for the purposes of astrology for business, message credibility is how I teach it and how I suggest to look at it. So, you know, when we talk about our story, and what I mean by story is the inherited story. So all the story that we have inherited either through our early upbringing and also the stories that we have heard that have been passed on to us that we have to some level adopted as our own. Things that you find yourself talking about, things that you find yourself complaining about, okay? Because there is a reason why that story stuck, okay? Now, some of it, or maybe even a lot of it, we may find yourself talking about almost not, you know, this is not an unconscious area of our chart, but because in my experience, it's very much connected with our inherited beliefs, we can find ourselves here almost like being a little bit of an autopilot because it's just something that we have exercised from really early on. We don't necessarily, for example, get to step into our second house gifts that early on. It takes a little bit of really understanding what, you know, how to contribute in the world and how, you know, we can be practical and things like that. But the third house, even though it comes after second in the zodiac wheel, again, it's something that we learn early on, right? To communicate, to express our needs, to, you know, learn our name, to all of that stuff. And really, as you're going to hear me say this several times today, to speak in human, okay? And this took me a while to really understand because it sounds like, well, of course, we're not in human. What other language, right? We could be expressing ourselves, but you would be surprised because obviously as a lot of us intuitives and healers, right? We know that information comes to us in multidimensional form, and it's not always in human language, right? So we're receiving it energetically, and yet the difference is that of how that energy needs to come through here is that it's up to us, right? We are that processor, we are that filter. And obviously we are more than that, but that's that aspect, right? Mercury and then the third house and then the third house ruler, where we need to make sense of this information, okay? And translate it into, if you like, human or a layman language. I mean, as layman as it makes sense to us. Obviously, this is going to be different whether we have Aries on the third, where we do want to be more direct, and or Gemini or even Taurus, compared to having Aquarius there. Or even Pisces, okay? So where we actually have more leeway, we're going to touch on this in terms of how we express that information. So having said that, we want to be as mindful of how clear and articulate we can be here, even if we have Pisces on the third, even if we have Neptune in the third, like I do. This becomes like it's an obsession of mine, even especially with that Neptune in the third, which I know helps me tremendously to really relax in the sort of logical way of understanding that used to be my way of the primary way of expressing and communicating because of a Mercury in Gemini. It took me a while, and I'm still learning really the importance of bringing that Neptunian intuitive way, multidimensional way. So really bringing it through the third house, and also with the North Node there, and then a Scorpio on the third, still getting to the point. Okay, so with that said, let's get to the point here. And so yes, we can have, I'm going to move on to the next slide because I get into some of these things in more slides. So we need to articulate ourselves here most coherently. It's the best way that I can describe this. I know oftentimes when people say, you know, this is maybe people will say that, we need to have strong communication skills here, but that's, I feel like it can be a little bit more, disputed. A lot of people will say, well, I have strong communication skills. I can express myself in writing, I can express myself in verbally, and so on and so forth. And yet, I am continually surprised to see how much more opportunity there is. Maybe again, because I'm biased with my own third house, right? Filter there with that North Node there. So, but the chances are, obviously, if you're listening to this and if this is resonating, this is relevant for you as well, on some significant level, is that there is not only that there is always another level to be here articulate, but there is, in my experience, and I invite you to study this, to apply this, and see what of this makes sense. I find, compare even to the first and the second, or even many other areas in our chart, the third seems to have more traps. Even though we use it so much, I feel like there is more of that, and maybe because we take it for granted, or whatever the reason is, because of maybe there is a lot of this inherent stuff, that we can take it for granted to the point where we think, oh yeah, I'm a great communicator. In the meanwhile, we're not making ourselves clear where it matters the most. And where it matters the most, your third house will show to you. Okay, so anyway, so let's move on here. So inherited learned mindset. So, really dropping into that belief that I am smart enough, right? I am, or I can be as articulate as I'd like to be. Again, if we have Neptune or a Pisces there, or even a Scorpio, that articulation looks different, okay? And if you have those energies there connected with even Aquarius, compared to having Aries, where, by the way, very important, does not come to us super naturally, or really I meant doesn't come to us very naturally. In certain scenarios, I find it does, and we do get a sense, for example, when triggered, okay? We're like, no, I get it, but I haven't been able to really do this on a more consistent basis. So there seems to be, even though we talk about consistency in the sixth, or at least this is where I teach it, that we need to practice it the most. I find this consistency and clarity is so very important in the third house, and it gives you clear keys, not just in terms of, healthy consistency, but really in terms of your credibility with believability, that sort of trust factor that we talk about in business. This is your very, very important key. And I invite you, even if you're like, today, trying still to understand how you can work with this archetype, I really invite you to be with it. And I do this almost on a daily basis. And until I really get a more clear understanding of what that Scorpio for me on the third house, and it's still an ongoing process. What do you have for me today? I will sit in and ask, right? What do I need to know about that? So it's a continuous process. Yes, there is a lot of tips here that I'm going to provide, and language and wording, but a lot of this really needs to be your inner process here with these guidelines that hopefully are going to illuminate something new that you can use in your business and in your practice. So what is my story? What is my message to the world? Things like our blog, book, video, audio, website, newsletter, all really we can get information about, for example, why do we do them? Do we not do them? How do we do them? And it may seem like it's one area, and how would all of that be there, but you would be surprised. Okay, and we're going to see how, for example, third house, in my experience, in my practice, is so directly connected with the books that we're meant to write, how it's directly connected with the message that we're meant to bring into the world. And if we do not do that, if we kind of stay with this sort of more outdated way of expressing ourselves, and as I was getting at there, I meant to say how I have found in my experience, we can get trapped here in this sort of this inherited and learned mindset that we may have inherited from our, parents, our grandparents, whoever has been teachers, early childhood experiences, early environment, or early school environment, and then kind of almost like stop our evolution here, thinking that we're not smart enough or that we cannot be as clear as other people or whatever the story may have been. When we talk about story, it's most relevant in the third house because this is where the story, we can get stuck in that story the most, okay? So your marketing, your speaking, your teaching, writing, media stuff, your learning style, for example, your relationship with things like tests, exams, people that have anxiety around it, or even maybe they need to pass certain tests and it's like, why, maybe it's not happening as easy as they would like to. This can actually give us clues around that. Courses you're meant to teach, even classes you're meant to teach, and or classes that you're meant to take. Now the 9th is important here. We're going to talk about that as well, and then the relationship of the 3rd and the 9th. And very importantly, we're going to talk about this a little bit more. Themes you're here to master, advance, and teach. But also, really, when we say, you've heard that expressed before, things that we're most meant to learn in order that we can teach it. So those things that we're most meant to learn in order that we can teach it. To me, in my experience, most applies to the 3rd house. That's where I place that. Okay, so not 1 gazillion things, not all 12 areas of our chart, right? But the 3rd, there will be some sort of compulsion here for you to, so I need to figure this out. It's like literally figuring out. There's a lot of figuring out that we do in the 3rd, which is a logical process. We don't need to be figuring things out in the 12th house. We don't need to be figuring them out even in the 6th. And definitely not in the 5th. Is more about, let's just figure out how I can spend my free time and have more fun and be more, playful. And, it's going to depend on planets you have there. And if you have Saturn in the 5th, it's going to look a little bit different, right, than having Neptune in the 5th. But hopefully you're getting an idea here how important this area is. And things like, when we say rhetoric, right, when somebody's rhetoric, we're going to find a lot of that here. Gossip, rumors, chit-chat, facts, or so-called fake news, right? Or the obsession with that. 3rd house. And Mercury, by the way. So if you've taken classes with me in the past, we've talked about, I refer to the 3rd house also be our expression of our soul language. And what I wanted to clarify here once again, that we are talking here about, because sometimes, when we think soul language, we are, I know most of us understand that as a frequency, and it really is a frequency primarily, okay? So really our soul language comes through in other areas of our chart, but it really most needs to, it's almost like the pitch needs to be most aligned. That pitch in music, it's like, oh, whatever the pitch is, it's like, okay, let's make sure it really clicks in here. And let's make sure that it's that we speak human as much as possible here. So that if we don't do that, we're going to find that people are going to be continually asking, can you really clarify what you mean? Or it's going to have difficulty expressing what we do, or we're just going to find that we're not being, heard, not necessarily seen, but not seen would be more the 1st house and or the 10th, not necessarily understood or heard. So if that's what you may be struggling with, you want to be looking at what is going on there in the 3rd house. Okay, so how to be an effective communicator? Logic, we place logic, so more the linear understanding in the 3rd, as compared to the 9th, which is more of a bigger picture, which like, let's take a step back, and it's more of your higher vision or highest vision, if you like. Having said, it's still going to depend on what signs you have there, because if you have Gemini, then we're talking very much we need to be as logical as we can be, which means that when we're speaking and communicating, we need to be following some sort of logical sequence. To give an example of, I know I always say I don't necessarily like using that Donald Trump example, but then I always end up doing it. So obviously there is something in that, but it's more descriptive, I find. So, and even just more recently, right, how often has he been called on his lack of credibility? And we're gonna see how that in his chart that's reflected in other examples. So when we're talking, for example, here being logical is like having a sort of consistency in how we are expressing ourselves from day to day, right? But also in how we are teaching, in how we are, following a certain logical sequence. Having said that, when you have a water sign on the third house and or a water, so-called water planet, right? The planet that rules a water sign, such as Pluto or Neptune, even Moon to a degree, right? Which is more imaginative than logical. Definitely it's more, connected with our inner logic, if you like, intuition more than that. It is different type of logic. So it's very, very important to understand that, similar to comparing Mercury in Gemini way of learning and teaching compared to somebody who has Mercury in Pisces. If you have Mercury in Pisces or Mercury in Sagittarius, for example, what else could there be? Even Mercury in Aries, and you're comparing yourself to Mercury in Gemini or Mercury in Aquarius, or where the comparison is. You need to stop doing that, and really your key thing here needs to be understanding, how does my Mercury, my processor, if you like, my inner teacher, right? And then the third house here, how can they really help me to express myself most coherently? Okay. There's no reason to be comparing our, when we have, for example, Neptune connected with the third, we need to be allowing more visual in our communication and more sound and more silence even. By the way, something that I also need to learn, obviously, compared to having, for example, Saturn in the third, which is more of a conventional, let's just stay on message and stick to the conventional way of what you would expect to hear from somebody. So it's more conservative. Okay, so hopefully this is making sense. So we're expressing the core frequencies of our sun, moon, rising sign here, I find most effectively and more effectively once we really get it, right? What's actually happening there and what we are invited to do here, what we can do here. And that is to really be well understood, okay? And again, to grow in that credibility and believability, right? In that trust factor, not just the know, and which is also the third house, by the way. So people know us when they hear a certain, when they read, it's like, oh, of course, it's, so-and-so. Yeah, I recognize that style, okay? So this is where third house helps you as well. But that also the believability, right? And that the credibility, as we like to call it. So it helps you to stay on a message. So if you're finding that, again, you're like all over the place in your marketing, and which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. I continually experiment with different ways of, and still discovering, right, different ways that we can express our potential here and other areas of our chart that need to communicate with it. But still to know what you need to come back to, right? Even if you're exploring and experimenting, that you can still say, okay, here we go, right? This is why maybe this message or this post or whatever it is, this class, right? Or this webinar, right? I really need to bring more of that Scorpio third house, right? Or Neptune or whatever it is, what may be for you, maybe Aries, maybe Virgo, and so on and so forth. So we're growing here, not just a credibility, but also that credibility towards why, because it allows our ideal clients, in our case for astrology for business purposes, for us to be relatable to them. Okay, so towards relatability as well, because people relate. They tend to relate more to people who have credibility, who are consistent and as clear as they can be. Doesn't mean that we have to be perfect, by the way. This is not about, being precise and perfect, unless, that is what your third house indicates. There are just many different flavors of how that will look like. So really what I find here, what we're discovering is our true harmonic. I've got here your harmonic. So really your true harmonic that will feel when you speak. So for example, with Scorpio in the third, you will hear me say you need to speak Scorpio. Or if you have Pisces, you need to speak Pisces. You need to speak Pisces. And if you're like right now, what? Then ask me questions, obviously, when you get the opportunity, so we can really understand. Obviously, there will be tons of information here to help you understand how you can speak Virgo, how you can teach Aries, meaning as a language, right? As that energy, because that's important to, to help you to, because that our archetype by your chart is recommended. It's going to most help you to stay in message and to align with your truth, right? Because a big part of our truth may still be undiscovered even to us, right? It's continually emerging. Even when we know what some of our core values are, even that can evolve, right? And what we like to talk about as, right, you may have found yourself as well, and I see this all the time with my clients and with myself. There's always new things that emerge. We're constantly, okay, what else, right? I can be talking about that will be in alignment with obviously what I am here to teach and or speak about. So what the third house helps us here is to be speaking our truth every time, even when we are feeling inadequate or not enough. Because again, it's going to depend. If we have Saturn here, or let's say Pluto, it can bring up some of the confidence stuff in the third house, or wherever we have some of those more, even Neptune to a degree, right? It's going to depend. Or the rulers, the third house rulers aspects, like if you have a ruler of the third in a square or an opposition to another planet, where it's like, this is a dilemma in my life. How do I bring both of these energies, right, to work together? It can bring up some of that not enough, or kind of like, because we haven't really figured out how to integrate it. So we're trying to do one thing at a time, which is usually the dilemma with oppositions. And because we are not integrating it, of course, it's going to be feeling like it's sort of like a little bit of a hit and miss. Okay. So what I most need to learn and become familiar with, in order to be knowledgeable about, to be proficient in order to teach it, share it with others, in particular those that are close to me, that are close to us, that are our community. But we're talking here, potentially, really, again, people that are like I like to say, like-minded to us. Okay, like-minded. So it's the community, but it's almost like that first level of community. Okay. First house is not necessarily about the community. Second house is not necessarily about the community, right? First house is about our attitude and our appearance and our body, right? Our physicality, if you like. The second house and our signature style. The second is about our core gifts, and in particular those that we're meant to monetize, okay, that we can rely on. And now we're getting first glimpses of, oh, isn't that interesting? When I talk about these things, people are quote unquote, people are resonating. And so this gives you first important skills here that you develop to actually start connecting with your community, and for your community to start resonating with you. We develop that more in the 7th, right? And in the 11th, those so-called social houses. And we've talked about that a little bit. And but third house, very, very important for that. For the 7th and the 11th, really to work together, and also very important from the 10th house perspective, which is your calling, your mission. Okay, so what do we find most often chatting about or complaining about? So we're talking about it repetitively. It's almost like by default. It's like this, right? It's like our mind is continually reminding us there is something about this, there is something about this. Doesn't mean that the story that we find ourselves telling ourselves, or even repeating, right, or even complaining to other people, or bringing into awareness, is your divine truth. It just, in my experience, it just really what it means is there is something about it you need to I'm going to say evolve, okay, in order to grow, to actually expand your mindset, so that to the 3rd and the 9th can really work in a more integrated way. We don't want to stay stuck in the 3rd. It's super important, but I have found the most successful thinkers and thought leaders, if you like, and influencers and successful business people have really figured out how to integrate these polarities that for a lot of us early on, really most people early on, we're kind of focusing on individually, like the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, right? So we do need to talk more about it. So there is, from a soul evolutionary perspective, we do need to talk. There's something we need to talk to. It's like, let's talk it out, okay? We need to discuss it. We need to engage. We need to start engaging here. It's usually more easier to engage here in the third house, which is why gossip is, or whatever way you know, the chit chat is an easier way to communicate than actually seventh house communication that actually requires relating on an equal footing, right? This is where the relationships kick in. Yes, we have relationships here with our siblings and again, like-minded and so on and so forth. Even teachers, we discover in the third, in particular the elementary education, early education. But we need to we learn the importance of engaging with others. Again, why? If I don't speak human, if I don't make my needs known, if I don't speak my truth, other people are likely not going to read my telepathic messages. Now, some people may do, but obviously it's going to make it a whole lot more easier if we're optimizing this area. Okay, so we need to be exchanging our viewpoints. Even if we're stuck in some biases here, we still need to be in a dialogue here. Now, it's going to depend. Some people may need to be more, like if you have massive planets here, especially if you have Sun and or North Node, but even if you have more planets, even the moon, very important to focus in here. Like I find a lot of people, I remember early on years ago when I would find somebody has the Sun in the third, I would just expect that they would have great communication skills and that they're, you know, meant to be a teacher, a speaker, a writer. And then I was baffled many times to actually to hear that, it's almost like the I'm fine. People with the Sun in the third, again, it may depend from chart to chart, right? And the aspects of that Sun are still learning how to really, they're seeking, or at least everybody's going to do this at a different level. Some people may be more aware of that and some may not. But I'm finding, in fact, very recently, at least a couple of people that I can think of, if I could just figure out how to express myself here, and not just in the business, by the way. I've just recently had a client who, and we've had, I think it was at least 2, if not 3 sessions that has Sun. Now she does have Sun Pluto in here in the third, and in Libra. So you would think, right, that she would be well versed in expressing herself in a diplomatic way and be able to relate, but I think it's in part because of the Pluto as well. That kind of was like, if I could just figure out to really say, you know, to my partner what I really need him to hear. It's been a process. Okay, so we need to be learning here, right? When we say we need to keep learning, this is where we really need to be most focused on learning, not so much on the second, even though it doesn't hurt to keep those of our core gifts up to date. But here it's very important to be up to date on best practices, so that we're not just replaying some of the stuff that we have learned from our siblings or from our parents. A lot of that is great that we can rely on, but we need to be bringing it into the modern age, basically. Okay, what are the newest ideas here? And in particular, that sign archetype on the third house cusp will help you, and then even planets in the third and the ruler. You know, the story behind the courses you're signing up for, the chances are the third house is going to give you a very, very important clue as to why maybe you have been signing up for this and that course over and over, and what is it that you really are looking to get, right, to figure out, to learn. Okay, so very important from a business perspective, right? How to market ourselves and how to promote ourselves. So in the third, we're learning how to speak about what we do, and the chances I already have figured that one out, right? That if we don't really seek to really not just speak about what we do, but actually do that effectively, it definitely makes our life a little bit harder for our services and our products to be marketable and promotable, right? And so there is that translation part that we need to do here, and in as logical way as we can, but also honoring the energies here, because again, water signs here are going to be more. We're going to actually have more leeway, not having to be as logical and so linear, and can actually use different other mediums to express themselves. So for example, Mercury in Pisces is a visual learner. even, Mercury in, so I'm talking about both. Mercury I think it's easier maybe to hear it. It's a similar concept with both. We're going to learn why both Mercury and the third house are important, as well as the ruler of the third house. Mercury in Cancer, empathic learner, right? Somebody who's tuning into the emotion behind what is being learned. Compare it to Mercury in Taurus that loves to be hands-on. Mercury in Gemini, this would be similar with the Gemini in the third house, right? I need to understand this logically. So this is very important. So you're not there comparing yourself and trying to be like somebody else. I mean, imagine you have Pisces on the third and you're trying to communicate and you're looking up to somebody with Gemini in the third. You could be like beating yourself up trying to sound like that person, and it just does not sound like you're speaking you, okay? So this is where we can, and this is very key here. If you get this, really, you're going to get a lot out of this class, is where I find we can be very resistant. We can be resistant on the ascendant as well, depending on our relationship with our body as well. But in the third, there's almost like a new level of resistance here. And I think it's because, again, we have lots to rely on here, but in a different way than the second house. It's a lot more what we have heard. Just because we have heard it so many times from our relatives, our siblings, it doesn't mean that it's true and that it's going to be relevant for us. There is something very important here that we need to lean into that resistance and actually learn to do differently. Again, bring it into the modern, into the new paradigm, if you like. So for example, if you have Scorpio on the third, you may have been hearing, right, as you can imagine. So yeah, we're looking here at the shadowy expression of that, because that's what I'm finding people get stuck in. Because the third house is connected with those maybe limited mindsets that we are most vulnerable to, if I can put that, but I think it's because we're most exposed to. That's what third house shows to me. So then when I'm looking at, when somebody who's trying to really to basically build a new lifestyle, but they're constantly, it's like being stuck in a south node to a degree. It's a different energy, but still here I think it's more of this, it's almost like we have confidence there, but it's almost like we keep replaying it as if it's something that we are familiar with. But when we actually deeply look at what we're saying, we're going to realize that we've been kind of playing it on on replay, and we haven't really understood what is it asking of us. And this is very, very important in my experience, to understand it and consciously express it, so that we can build that credibility and actually dismantle both third and the fourth, which we may or may not touch on the fourth as much, but the third is also very, very important in my experience, to dismantle limiting beliefs here and unconscious bias, which, by the way, ninth house also helps us to do. Okay, so that resistance here to being coherent and clear, in particular, by the way, not just in all ways, but in particular, resistance to the third house energy. That's what we're talking about. The particular potential of your third house. That's what resistance seems to be. And so it's almost like how we resist that Capricorn and Saturn in our chart, just in a little bit of a more subtle way, I want to say, because it can almost be like a trickster, where we feel like, no, I figured that out. It's like when people say, no, I don't need to. No, you do need to learn this. Like if you were to truly understand how, I'll give you my example, right? So I've lived through a war, I've had a traumatic childhood, and that's oftentimes what is almost like my comfort zone to talk about. It doesn't scare me, it's just, what I've lived through, it's my lived experience. So having said that, I also find that repeating that story, right, which is that Scorpio, which is that deep dive, right, story that can be traumatic, right, to other people who are not, I don't mean necessarily traumatic to them, but even just a little bit like, my goodness, I cannot believe that you lived through that. And yet I need to learn to really dismantle this sort of I'm going to call it old school way of understanding that Scorpio. And so to give an example, where I would have been picking, I mean, you can already guess where I would have picked that up. My mom has Scorpio rising, and she has Mars in the 8th house, which is the ruler of her ascendant, in the Scorpio area of her chart. So very, very strong Scorpio. My dad has Sun in Scorpio, and also Mercury and Venus. So very, very strong Scorpio, like a triple Scorpio energy there. Okay, so can you imagine, right? I mean, I can imagine, right? There's tons of that sort of worst case scenario, you could say, expectation with that Scorpio the third, which is, you know, a lot of it was not self-fulfilling prophecy, but it was a story of my life. It was a story of my life, and yet I could also disconnect from that because of the shadowy way of how that Scorpio, if I don't connect with the emotion of it, if I try to process it very much like a third house logical experience, which we cannot process through that metaphysical energy that Scorpio is about. If I try to overly make it logical, as it's like, oh, by the way, this is what I live to, it just, you know, I'm missing out on the fuller potential here of really how to emote, how to go into the emotion of this, and really what that Scorpio in the third house can teach me in my communication. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to stop there with that, but hopefully you can bring this to also your own chart. Now, why? I've been wondering why, but why? Like, I keep asking, why are we resisting it? Like, it just seems like it should be something that is easier than maybe other areas. And so my understanding of it is perhaps because, and so you may be familiar with that the more clarity we have, so clarity, energetically speaking, equals speed, right? So the moment we get clear, we're actually going to manifest and attract and or create more, you know, whatever it is that we're desiring, whatever it is that we're communicating, right? When we actually ask for what we need, like say in a restaurant, you know, until we make that order, the chances are that salad is not coming your way, right? When we actually say, hello, you know, I need that salad, and, you know, I need it with specific dressing, right? So the sooner I place that order, the sooner that is going to get manifested. But we could also be resisting that unconsciously because of whatever stories we may have around other, even, let's say, the 10th house and expectations and any other expectations that we may have. So hopefully this makes sense. We are here also, I find, asking constantly, I hear it, but how do I? And I'm like, I wish I could just, you know, bring this understanding to you to show you that you already have this. So you already, maybe not as easily relied on as in the second. I find there's just more interference here. And I think it's because it's the nature of it, of the third house it's basically like, you know, when we say information overload, because it's the area where we, or if you could say a level of consciousness, right? Like our mental body, right? Where we're constantly, especially in today's day and age, either listening to the news, and oftentimes listening or watching the news. And then I don't do this anymore. I think most of the time I don't. Been definitely creating more silence. But I know a lot of people who do and say, I can't study without listening to music. I'm watching the news and at the same time I'm, typing. So it's like this multiple third house basically going on that can be pretty much like, driving us crazy. And then we're constantly wondering, but how do I? Well, why? Because we're distracted. We're bumping into our own interference here, into our own ego mind. And what I mean in our own ego mind, I mean the ego mind from yesterday, from last month. Because if we're looking to create a new life, we need to be saying, okay, who do I need to be, right? What do I need to think? What do I need to be, what story here I need to be creating that's going to be more in alignment with my future self, with what I'm creating. And so there is still tons of gifts here for us to align with a higher expression of our third house so that we don't get stuck in that more biased and more inherited third house mindset. And then also the ninth house, okay, very much can help us to take it to the next level. So whenever you feel like, oh, I feel like I'm getting stuck in my third, what is the ninth house asking? This is the area where then, right, we go after high school, and elementary school in the third, we say, okay, well, I'm going to pursue some higher education, or maybe I'm going to take other courses, or maybe I'm going to learn a new language. I'm going to learn about new cultures, right? Maybe I'm going to travel. This is all the ninth house stuff. Maybe I'm going to take a sabbatical and just take a little bit time off and just really expand my horizons, okay? So I'm taking course after course as if I don't already know enough, the third house stuff, okay? So I'm going to be looking at the third house ruler here for more information. So I'm going to contrast it with the ninth house if you're getting stuck here. But do spend some time to understand it. So what are we encountering in the third house? We're encountering our most coherent self. And when I say that, I mean in human language. I know, a little cheeky, but you know, humor me for the moment. As opposed to our mumbly self. So people that are mumbling, they're like, oh, what did you just say, right? Or they're just, maybe they don't care about expressing themselves, or maybe they're trying, or maybe they're just, they you know, we find that we're speaking as clear as we can, but people close to us, it's like we fell from another planet, or they fell from another planet, okay? Third house stuff, okay? Third house stuff before it's ninth house. Our inner critic. This is why you can also get stuck here, because we meet our inner critics here, and or let's say our past teachers or elementary teacher, and if the elementary teacher was not supportive, or maybe our parent, one of our parents was a little bit more Saturnian, right? And it was not as affirmative of our expression here. Maybe we were corrected every step of the way, or maybe frequently enough, right? That creates certain imprints here in programming. So there's a lot of programming here that we need to be unlearning and really deconditioning. So this is why it's a huge, huge treasure chest here. Disruptive selves, like if we keep interrupting other people in conversation, right? Memory, in particular the memory of this lifetime, the early life, or loss of it. If we find that we're losing certain memories, which by the way, we can do also through prayer, not just through some sort of medical conditions. Right? Anytime we're letting go of thoughts, emotions, energies that no longer serve us, we could be also letting go of the memories that are attached to those traumas and or experiences that no longer serve us, okay? Siblings, neighbors, school teachers, a mother tongue, we're learning in third, right? Books, very much mentally absent self, incoherent self, busy self, right? Busy, oh, I'm very busy. Typically, we're very busy here. We're typically also going to be busy wherever we have Mars in our chart, wherever we have a lot of planets, wherever we have the ruler of the ascendant. But this tends to be in our day and age, tends to be the busy area in terms of how we understand today. Busy is, I've got lots of emails to go through. I have lots of content creation, or lots of whatever it is, right? So high school bully, driving, cars, motion sickness, news, media, marketing, promotion, as I mentioned, your website we encounter in the third. So I talked about the ninth, which is now where, when we realize that we've got some bias to work through, and if we find that we're not fully embracing our higher vision, if we're just repeating a lot of the stories, if not life experiences that our parents have lived through, we need to sooner than later, I suggest, realize that, okay, there's got to be a bigger picture here. There's got to be an easier way, which is going to be more, there's got to be a world out there that I am meant to step into that may be different than my siblings, right? That I'm not meant to be compared, right, to my brother or sister, and they're not meant to be compared to me, because the chances are, unless we're twins, we're going to have a different chart. And even twins, by the way, take on different parts of the chart, interestingly enough. So even twins have different ways that they take on to express themselves. Ninth house is also your ideal client's language. So as the third house is your language, I place your ideal client's language in the ninth. Now, why would that be? It's because, remember, we placed ideal client in the seventh. So seventh is first from the seventh, eighth is second from the seventh, and then ninth is, of course, third from the seventh. Okay. So, but I do want to, as you're going to hear me, I want you to kind of keep that in perspective. So it's natural that, you want to be really focusing on upgrading your own learning and your own language, first of all, because even though we may think that it's like a completely different archetype here, so for example, Scorpio compared to Taurus, I'm going to be sharing today and then in the future classes as well, how, there is really a lot of similarity on the same polarity, on the same spectrum, and it's not a whole different thing, say between Scorpio and Taurus. It's just it's like a similar path, or rather, it's almost like the same, well, basically the same polarity. It's just from a different perspective. I'm speaking from a Scorpio perspective, and also Sagittarius with Sag North Node in the third, and my ideal clients understand it or seek to understand it from a Taurus perspective, because I've got Taurus on the 9th. I also have Gemini there, so that also plays into that. So the logic, but also how can I embody this information? How can I make, so I need to be keeping that in mind, but I don't want you to, it's like, oh, now I have to be worrying. Don't worry about the 9th, but just to know that there is this perspective to keep in mind if you're getting stuck in your own 3rd, but don't run away from understanding your 3rd, okay? Soul language and your soul's expression here. Because by default, I found that when we tap into our 3rd effectively, by law of polarity, is your clients will get you. You will be understood, okay? So just to give us sort of an idea of that, of how we are heard, which is not going to be, how we want to be heard is not necessarily what we can control. People are going to get the idea potentially, but they may not receive it in the same way that we have it intended, just because their filter is different, okay? Okay, so what are we transforming in the 3rd? We're shifting the I am and I have, which is the 1st and the 2nd, into I am heard focus. So not just I have gifts or here's me, but I am being received, I am being heard, I am being witnessed, okay? So I see here what we're transforming is our inherent early mindset that needs to evolve to support the new future version of ourselves. Your future self needs to be supported, that has already created the dream life we desire. So if you're getting stuck in your 3rd house story, and it's not supporting, if you haven't tapped into that higher expression of that 3rd house energy, then you need to call in also the help of the 9th house, which is where your highest vision is. And if you're like, oh, it's a little bit too big perspective, then kind of come back and see how understanding the polarity and pulling this together, the polarity of the 3rd and the 9th will also help you to understand that, okay? So the outdated or autopilot mental models and mind constructs that need to be dismantled and upgraded in order to live from a more balanced and well-integrated and the highest expression of the 3rd and the 9th house sign polarity. So as I said, I find when you tap into the highest expression of your 3rd house, it's by the law of polarity, right? It's like a law of attraction, law of polarity. It is going to pull towards you also that the polarity of the 9th house sign. So you want to be seeking to align with so in order to really grow that message credibility, you want to be seeking to align with a more effective versus a less effective expression of that's basically the same sign. If you have one sign, maybe you have an intercepted sign. So you want to be continually, how can I be more effective here? What would be a more effective expression of this Scorpio or the Virgo on the 3rd? Okay. Okay, so I've got here an example. So for example, I need to be seeking really to express effective Scorpio for me, and which would be believing that I can express myself more fully, which means like the truth, either, there's no good or bad, as you oftentimes hear me when I talk about Scorpio. There's no good or bad from Scorpio perspective. There is no, scary and taboo. So if I'm feeling that it's relevant, if it's coming through, if I feel that it's an expression of my fuller self, that I need to bring it through. Because the more I try to repress it, the more that Scorpio third house is going to, either I can fall into numbing it out, okay, or sound like a robot, which I do catch myself sometimes. But I'm constantly reminding myself, okay, Marty, you need to emote more, you need to be more real here, and you need to really bring the wholer self here, including the shadow self. And not be afraid that people are going to be scared, or they're going to be, like, oh my God, and all of that stuff. So letting those sort of terror-filled beliefs go, because they're just they're part of my past story. They're not necessarily reflective of also this higher expression. There's a more effective way of working with that Scorpio, as I mentioned, which is going to be different than how my mom and dad worked with that energy. Okay, so with that said, I've got here a slide for you, as usual, on third house energy. By the way, you can use this for having, for example, the ruler of the third in a particular, in say first house as well. So has similarity to that Aries or Mars meaning that I've got here. So if you have Aries in the third, right, I can best articulate, make myself clear in alignment with the principles of. So for Aries and or Mars on the third would be decisiveness and clarity and, intention, vitality, activity. So with Taurus would be peace and simplicity and, embodied voice. The voice really needs to be embodied, as opposed to logical. Okay, or compared to Gemini in the third or Mercury in the third, right? Where we need to be more of telling a story. And as we know, stories usually follow some sort of logical sequence. And we also want to be arousing curiosity. We want to be more dialogue oriented. Cancer in the third would be more of the principles of healing and really honoring also our ancestry and or our feminine, some sort of a tradition oriented, maybe so like honoring tradition or, working with compassion and kindness energies. With Leo in the third and or Sun in the third, we really need to really shine our light even brighter, and continually be looking for ways to do that. Part of that is also bringing some humor. And so oftentimes I find it doesn't always come easy. It does when we have, like we've seen, we're going to be reminded today with Dalai Lama, with Venus in the third house in Leo. So yeah, it comes a little bit easier to him, but I oftentimes find doesn't come naturally in very, consistently people with Leo on the third to actually bring that humor. So how this works is basically with the Leo on the third, you do not want to sound like a Scorpio. So I always, like a Scorpio on the third. So always when I find that I on the third house, when I find Leo, I said, I know that we need to bring more lightheartedness here. So how can we bring more of that fun, a loving way to communicate? Usually it sometimes requires a little bit of a practice or a little bit of some sort of, I've got here Returning to Love, basically, which is actually just happens to be the book that was written, her bestseller for Marianne Williamson, and she's got Leo on the third, right? Like how literal is that? With Virgo, the principles of analytical, just being more analytical and actually logical, but really more holistic in our in our expression and more edited, service-oriented, really things that are really more practical and functional in terms of how we express ourselves, in terms of how we express ourselves with our time, but also what we talk about. Libra on the third, which we've seen with the Trump and Trudeau and how they use this differently. The principle of peace and diplomacy, equality, teamwork, harmony, alliance, negotiation, right? Politeness, manners, but also political correctness, right? Reconciliation, legality also here, and popularity. And you can see how it's very relevant for both of them, but just in a different ways. Scorpio is a really honest truth telling, really bringing that emotion and not being afraid to talk about things that maybe other people would not be willing, or just they don't have desire to. It's just not their path. Like bringing more of that intimacy into what we share. And this is, you may find, by the way, that this, you can apply this if you've got let's say Scorpio rising or Scorpio or the second house or any of these. It's going to apply in a different way. The difference here, then in the third, you really needs to come in your communication, verbal, written, and really as an X factor in increasing your believability, so that people actually trust you, what you're sharing, and consistently so. With the Scorpio on the rising compared to Scorpio in the third, the difference is it's more of that sort of that first impression, that first attitude, the look in our face, for example, the general energy. But then when we start talking, right, and sharing, this is where the third house then kind of comes into effect, if you like, okay? Sagittarius, the principle of expansion and growth, liberties, right, more energy rich, positive expectation, enthusiasm. Capricorn, principles of responsibility, authority, right? Very important that we're, when we talk about credibility, this is really where that really comes into play. So somebody with Cap on the third may find that if you don't really, speak pragmatically and even conservatively, and if you're not goal oriented, and if there is no structure to what you're sharing, that can be a challenge. So it's very, very important to keep this in mind. It's going to give you that X factor you may be looking for. Aquarius, that individuality, freedom, really truth, originality element. I often find Aquarius, a third house, people that are really meant to bring some alternative views in maybe the 10th house, even ideas, or even, again, the ruler of the third, where that Saturn and Uranus will give you ideas as to where that also could be. And it probably actually maybe even easier to decondition your beliefs, so that you really feel like you are more ahead of your family, or even really feeling like you really have different beliefs. Maybe you have been more aware of that earlier on, but still that Aquarius in the third is ruled by Saturn, so there could still be some bias there. That's important. Some still very rigid conservative beliefs, right? So very, very important to understand that even Aquarius in the third has lots of work to do to increase that believability, trust factor there, should you choose to do that. With Pisces on the third, so it's the principle of spirituality, of unity, really all embracing, more accepting, more following the flow, trusting intuition, and allowing for that more stream of consciousness, and working with what I like to call the miracle mind, okay? Now here is a similar slide, but just to give you more ideas as to also what you could, so a little bit developed based on the previous one, just a little bit more information in terms of what you could talk about and how would this kind of look like. And also how this would basically color your communication style in a more effective way. So I've got here just for more, so that it's more visualizable and maybe more embodiable. I've added sort of a teacher a term for each one of the archetypes. So Aries, I've got here as a teacher of vitality. Can also be teacher of energy and teacher of activity, okay? So, but I've got here teacher of vitality. So I'm growing in coherence, credibility, and trust when I'm sharing, speaking as a teacher of vitality. You could, if you are more familiar with speaker, an author, some sort of content creator, but really teacher, speaker, writer. So I've got here teacher of vitality for Aries, or Mars connected with the third. Taurus would be teacher of embodiment. Gemini, teacher of dialogue and communication and or marketing. Teacher of healing with Cancer in the third. Teacher of love. By the way, you may have Cancer in the second. This will actually come to you with more ease. So somebody that has, so just to make that clear, you can also be a teacher of healing with Cancer on the second, but it's actually going to come to you with more ease, and you may be aware of that with more earlier on. Somebody with Cancer on the third is also meant to be on some level. Now, by the way, I've got here teacher of healing. This could be also somebody who is meant to share supportive just bring that energy of support in what they're doing, right? There are different ways, right, that can also be supportive in what we're doing. But there's more learning here that needs to happen, and there's more sort of upgrading, if that makes sense, okay? And there can even be more resistance to it early on than with somebody who has Cancer in the second. So I hope that makes sense. Leo on the third, teacher of love, right? It's like heart-centered leadership. Teacher of wholeness for Virgo in the third. Teacher of peace with Libra on the third. Scorpio would be teacher of esoteric truth. Sagittarius, teacher of diversity. Capricorn, teacher of integrity. Again, you may find that if you have Capricorn rising or even Capricorn the second, this may apply. It's just a difference here that with having Capricorn rising, this needs to be the first thing people see. And it's basically your style, okay? You may necessarily need to prove it or talk about it. We do need to prove more in the third, okay, in order to increase that know, like, trust factor. So I hope that makes sense. Aquarius on the third, teacher of the new paradigm. But really any of these other right here you can apply. Teacher of what could be astrology, of change, right, of some progressive ideas in whatever field that you are an expert in. Pisces, teacher of spirituality, but it can also be teacher of relaxation, of forgiveness and enlightenment, and so on and so forth. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. These are those typical slides that now, as you identify the ruler of your third and this particular sign, and then this house, right, a particular house, you can use these two slides to help you to get to the next step, right? And also you can use the previous slide for that same purpose. So the houses slide that we have already talked about, it just here for ease of access. And we are going to introduce, I'm introducing now the concept of aspects. Okay, so I'm going to highlight this. I'm not going to go into a detail for each slide, but I will highlight some of these things. So some of this I'm going to skip, but I do invite you to read what of this makes sense and maybe come back to it when it makes sense. So planetary aspects are these geometric angles between planets. Okay, so they really are these, you know, as you see those geometric patterns that you see in every chart, right? Those particular lines, blue, red, green, they can be anywhere from 0 to 360 degrees, but there are specific major aspects that we study in astrology. And those are either they're referred to as major aspects or sometimes so-called Ptolemaic aspects, but you don't have to remember that right now. The most important ones, as you can imagine, would be the sun and the moon and your planetary, the ascendant ruler aspect. So really what they now give us more information in addition to that, to the sign that tells us the attitude of that, the how, and then the house, right, that gives information as to context. Where is that planet and that energy most likely to express itself, like what area of your life. The aspects now give us more information as to how easy and or effortless is that energy going to flow between these two areas of life, or these two levels of consciousness, if you like. All aspects serve a purpose, and there are no good or bad aspects. Okay. So there are certain degrees and orbs that we allow. I've got here, you can read through that. You don't have to concern yourself too much with this. We're not going to be spending way much here on the aspect theory. It may be a separate course on its own. I found it. It's very important, but what I'm teaching you here, you're going to be able to get so much of what you need to know in order to create your marketing plan. And even just by understanding where to focus in your chart, and really what archetypes and energies to work with, and basically in what context. Having said that, we're allowing 7 degrees of orb for conjunctions, oppositions, squares, and trines, and 5 degrees for sextiles and quincunxes, in case you are wondering and you already are familiar with the concept of aspects. So what do I mean? What do I mean? I know it's easier to see this visually. To give an example, and we already chatted about this moon Neptune here. conjunction is for Dalai Lama in his 3rd house. Conjunction is when we have 2 planets that are really close to each other, so within that 7 degree or so. So we can see here, you know, when you go here vertically down to where it gives that symbol, which you're gonna, if you haven't already learned, you may start noticing that in the chart, is basically a symbol for an opposition. So it's moon is in opposition to Saturn. And you can see here that you're going to notice oppositions, meaning when the planets are exactly opposite to each other, is noted and or described by a red line. Okay, so moon is opposite Saturn, although it really is moon and Neptune together working in unison here, opposite Saturn. And you can see here that sign for conjunction right here. So moon, then there's a sign for conjunction. Then we go across here to see what planet it is in conjunction with, and that is Neptune. If at this point you're like, oh, the aspects are a little bit more complicated, just skip this part and move to past the aspects. Okay, I don't want you to get stuck on this area, but for those of you, because I'm introducing the concept today, and then I will be bringing it up in, especially with conjunctions and some of these aspects that are easier to notice. Okay, I will bring it up. Just gives us an additional layer here of information. Basically to give us an idea of the most likely way that the energy will express itself. You know, is it going to be more harmonious? Again, is it going to be more easy, or is it going to require more effort? So here we've got the sun. See how there's that blue line right over to Jupiter here in Dalai Lama's chart. So if we go here down, sun, right, we can see that there is that, oh, it's covered up here, but you can see there is a trine to Jupiter with a blue line. If you're like, oh, I wonder what that blue line is, well, that's what we're learning right now. And then you can see that he also has this Sun-Mars square. It literally is that square symbol there. Okay, there's another line there that goes over to Mars. So it gives them that drive and, you know, moves them to act. Okay. This actually shows you here that Sun trine Jupiter. See, there's a Jupiter trine Saturn, and there is a Jupiter sextile Neptune. So I'm going to move through this a little bit faster here. So for Dalai Lama, right, he's got the Leo on the 3rd, right? So the Sun rules the 3rd. It rules also the 2nd. So it is, and for example, would be important for him, not just for his core gifts and values, but also from the 3rd house perspective in terms of his message credibility. Okay. So I'm going to move through the descriptions of the aspects, but you can, you know, spend some time and read upon this. So I'm just going to give just a keywords here for conjunctions, which you're going to see this particular symbol here with that sort of circle and a diagonal line. It merges two energies together as partners. They have to work together. Okay. Then when you see the symbol that looks like the glasses, that is the symbol for the opposition. So really the planets are now 180 degrees plus minus, right? 7 degrees. And we are here looking to kind of balance, to integrate that. It would be usually planet in Aries with planet in Libra, Taurus, Scorpio. Okay. So when we talk about balance, this is literally your chart will tell you if you have an opposition, this is actually where you need to balance a polarity, in particular if you have an opposition. So you don't have to be balancing everything, but if you do have an opposition, this is where you need to be focusing on integrating that. If you have a square, this is actually gives us a drive. There is usually some inner conflict there and or developmental pressure that we need to resolve. It can be also connected with our passions, you know, where we tend to get stressed out. And thankfully, we also have so-called harmonious aspects. So those would be 120 degree so-called trine. That is, you know, very supportive. So 2 planets that are in A trine, they tend to vibrate together, work like friends and allies. They're friendly to each other. And then this sort of symbol of like an asterisk or snowflake, if you like, is the so-called sextile. So it's just not as powerful, not as strong version of trine, but very, very similar in expression. Okay. So here's a little bit of a visual. So for example, if you have sun, and it could be another planet as well, or moon between, in Taurus and Capricorn, so both in earth signs, they would be in a trine, okay? If you have, on the other hand, sun in Aries and moon in Capricorn, you would notice that red line, right, in that, say, astro.com chart. So it's a more of a drive, urge to resolve this dilemma and to integrate actually these two basically aspects of our consciousness. If there are a so-called aspect, it means that they still need to work together. It's just a different way that a trine and or a square will work together. Okay, here's more information about the aspects that you can read. And ta-da! So based on what we learned today, here's an easy, really easy breezy way to basically incorporate what we've learned today and I've shared this in a couple of other previous courses, including, I believe, the last year's Astrology for Business, I'm pretty sure, as well, and maybe another course as well. So your teacher, author, speaker archetype, right? I'm gonna have that similar template that I've been using in previous videos, but if you're like, oh, you know what, I just wanna look at that in a more simpler way, this is that simpler template. I know for some of you it may work to kind of use that more of a table looking template. For some of you it may work more to use the more visual, to insert that information in the chart. So I'm going to show you actually 2 or 3 different ways that you can work with this information. You don't have to be using that table if you feel like it's more work that it needs to be. So my teacher, author, speaker archetype is as A, and then you're going to insert a higher expression keyword of that 3rd house sign based on the slides that I have shared just moments ago. In what role, right? In the role of a, basically then you're going to use the the planetary ruler of the 3rd house sign. So what do I mean by that? So for example, you may have Aries on the 3rd, right? Then the ruler of the 3rd house is going to be Mars. So you're going to first here put the keyword for Aries, and then if that Mars is in Aquarius, then you're going here to put a keyword connected with the sign of Aquarius, okay? And then what context, what field of experience, where in my life, then you're going to put a keyword here for that house of the planetary ruler of your third house. Okay, so this is just even a simpler way to help you to basically just a different way of expressing this, because I know it may work differently for different minds, especially when we're talking about the 3rd house. So if you just want even a more simpler way to put this information together, so that you can really benefit from understanding here your mindset and the language you're using and all your clients, and how you can be more coherent here. By coherence, I mean being clear, logical, and consistent. That's basically what a dictionary says about coherence anyway. And then basically how that contributes to your messaging or message credibility. So I speak as a, right? Basically, you're going to do what? You're going to insert here meanings connected with your 3rd house energy, with your 3rd house key, if you like. So that would be the sign on the 3rd house. It could also be a planet in the 3rd house. You can use that slide once again, and or ruler of the 3rd. So my core themes are: start with the sign on the 3rd, and then add if you have an intercepted sign. And then also my language story is connected to, and then add those keywords connected with a 3rd house sign. Okay, So this is a similar concept here, just a little bit more outlined way of looking at that. And ta-da, here is that sort of all-encompassing, well, actually there are two of them. So this particular one, which is the marketing language keys slide, just using the system that we already have been using, focusing on the sun, moon, ascendant, signature tone, and core frequencies, which by now you already have that worked out, that you can just literally use it in this video as well. The difference here, we're looking at the third house primarily, the third house sign, third house ruler, and then the third house planet, okay? And then, you know, last time we had the first and the seventh house polarity relating, right? Your rising sign relating to your descendant, representing your ideal clients. Here, we have now your third house archetype, right? Representing your teacher or speaker archetype, that needs to be heard by, okay? So it's a similar idea, if you like, with that first and the seventh, but in this case, we really need to be heard. We're not just relating and then, you know, whatever happens, happens. We are also sharing, communicating, and hopefully sounding as clear as we can be. So, for example, with having Scorpio, Taurus, this is also called a learning axis. It would be a taboo breaker representing Scorpio, right? And or esoteric teacher, heard by teacher of embodiment and practicality. Okay, so this would be an example that I would see in my own chart. And then the final, really, your magnetic marketing map based on now that previous slide. Okay, what we're doing here is now incorporating, so obviously sun, moon, rising, okay, and really keep it simple here. So my signature style brand aligns with the, right, and then you're gonna insert here your, based on the class number 2, your signature style tones, just 2-3 words, right, because you're gonna have a lot of information here. This doesn't not have to be an essay for each one of these, just 2-3 words. I guarantee you this is going to start to kick up some things here and bring new insights as you work with it and actually apply it to your marketing. Then with the seventh house, important to know who you're actually speaking to. So my ideal client profile and theme, right, is, and then you're going to here see class number 4, which was a previous class for your ideal client profile. And then you're going to insert those keywords here. And then based on the previous slide, my message story aligns with and speaks of, right? And then you're going to see previous slide for your marketing language keys. Now, in addition here, for your marketing, magnetic marketing map, we are going to, and we've talked about the 10th house. The chances are you're familiar with the importance of the 10th house. And I've got a slide to help you to sort of plug that in very easily. There's, you know, similar archetype meanings, just in this case, you're going to fill in this in the context of my mission / calling in this lifetime is to, okay? And then you're going to see that 10th house slide, okay, for more information. I am suggesting to look at, to include Mercury here. You don't have to, but I do encourage you to, at least in the beginning, to sort of see how that Mercury sign and house will contribute to your magnetic marketing language. Okay, I think it's important to understand how you process information, how you learn. It really adds value to understanding also, again, the wealth of your third house and really your coherence. And how yours will differ from other people, okay, especially when you combine Mercury and the third house meaning. And so, and then the lastly here, we also include, as we have been, North Node, so my most aligned strategy for moving forward in life more effectively. And then you are simply here going to insert keywords connected with your North Node, just in this particular context, as I have shared it in this map here. Okay, so I hope that this makes sense. And once again, wherever you are in your really integration of this information, journey, then either choose to work with, use this particular template or one of the simpler ones in the previous slides, okay? So you could even start with the simpler ones and then, work your way up to this particular one, which really summarizes for you the key elements that I use to really understand what I need to keep in mind with my marketing on a regular basis, okay? And here's a slide that you can literally use these keywords for your 10th house meaning. Okay, so say with the Gemini in the 10th, right? So my mission is, right, to be a teacher writer, and I oftentimes mention this, and I have to remind myself as well, because as I mentioned, 3rd and the 10th are the areas that we need to be consistent and we need to work at. They don't always come naturally to us as maybe the ascendant and or 2nd house, and or the moon, right? Is, people do get used to me writing, for example, and obviously teaching, and so they tend to, expect it. I also have Cancer intercepted, so it's basically both the healer aspect of that, and really, in a way, how I show up in my mission, in my work, really is combining that, both the teacher and the healer elements of it. So I'm not just teaching and writing. I am, I care enough about what I'm sharing so that, especially if you work with me one-on-one, you get sort of that sense, at least that's what I hear, and that's what I strive for, that you really feel like I'm bringing that, nurturing energy to what I share. So it's not just here's information, right? Which even that on its own would be very relevant to tap into and actually bring it, in particular with the 10th house, in a more professional, more public domain, where we are almost like it's almost like the collective and the public know. Okay, this would be the difference between then just staying at our ascendant level, then moving and elevating our presence by incorporating the midheaven energy as well. Okay, so I've got a slide here on planets in the 10th house, so you can use that as well. A little bit of information more about Mercury, right, as analyzing that in conjunction with your 3rd house, right? So your soul language expressed in human. That's the best way that I can describe my understanding of the 3rd house, compared to, I think, what most people may be teaching about that. Again, I feel like we need to be striving to be as coherent as we can be here, to grow in credibility, to grow in relatability, in that sort of trust factor, and the know factor as well. There's a slide on Mercury, where, with the key purpose to perceive, to learn, to transmit. So the best way that I can describe this in a sort of shortest, more straightforward way, if we did not have Mercury in the sky, you and I probably would not have a desire to learn and to teach. Yes, we would still have that 3rd house in our chart, but we would maybe feel like we don't really have the we wouldn't have the curiosity, we wouldn't have the function to, I don't even know how our mind would look, to be honest, with not having Mercury, for example, in the solar system. So it's very, very important, almost like an organ, really, in our body. It represents certain, it represents our limbs also, and so on and so forth. So it's important. It helps us to learn, to process information, to make decisions, then to transfer, exchange ideas, to really to transmit also what we are learning. Okay. And ta-da, with all of that said, let's look at some examples here in recap. And I have a few in different ways. So we have our Oprah with her Sag rising, obviously, Aquarius on the 2nd, and a Pisces on the 3rd, right? Libra on the 10th. So with that Pisces on the 3rd, she's got Jupiter, ruler of Pisces, in Gemini in the 6th. She has Neptune, the co-ruler of the 3rd, in the 10th of her public persona, if you like. She's got that PR-oriented and public-oriented Libra, and very graceful, right? Stylish Libra on the 10th. And ruler of the Libra is Venus in Aquarius, in very so creative, right? Feminist, actually, Aquarius in the 2nd of wealth. So what I've got here for Oprah, so I'm going to be using the template with Oprah's example. So my signature style brand aligns with, and we already have, I believe, used her example before. So I'm simply here just including some of the keywords. You don't have to include everything here, but just some of the words that really kind of remind me, right, of that key style here, with her sun, moon, and her rising sign, with her sun in Aquarius in the 2nd, moon in Sagittarius in the 11th, close to the 12th, right, that philanthropic Sagittarius, a moon, that very innovative and humanitarian Aquarius in the 2nd. So I've got here wealthy, humanitarian, educational organization, right? That's basically when I see moon in Sag, right? Education, in the 11th, organization. Okay, that's basically what she very much was passionate, or still is passionate about, bringing through. It's almost like intimately very, very important to her. And a philanthropist, right? So her 7th house ideal client profile and themes, we already talked about that last time. So author, writer, reader, marketer, promoter, women, moms, right? Readers who give back. So basically generous readers, diverse influencers, culture change agents. So this is basically based on the previous weeks. So 3rd house now, with Pisces on the 3rd. I've got just 3 words here, right, that I picked from that slide: compassion, forgiveness, unity, right? It's connected with spiritual guidance, right? So even though she is the, a businesswoman, and basically obviously has an empire in publishing, she's got a magazine, she's got her, she has had her, TV shows and so on and so forth, but she speaks Pisces, which is that I really get that, right? When she communicates, which is that, the spiritual guidance. And then the ruler of that Pisces is Jupiter in the 6th of healthy habits. And I've got here healthy habits dialogue. And this is oftentimes, right, what she talks about. Why dialogue? Because Jupiter is in Gemini. So I'm literally just putting together the keywords to give me an idea. This could be also healthy dialogue. The co-ruler, right, of Pisces is Neptune. She's got that in Libra in the 10th. So I've got here spiritual business visionary, right? Spiritual Neptune, business 10th house, visionary, because that's also another keyword for Neptune. Okay. And I've got here equality because that Neptune is in Libra. So that's also important. So I'm literally just putting these words here to kind of to give me an idea, and then by the I get to the end of this, I really get a good sense of how she can stay on message and actually differentiate herself from other business women, for example. Obviously Oprah has figured this out, right? But it's an easier example in that regard as well. So my mission calling in this lifetime is to, so she's got the Libra on the 10th. So we could say, I've got here, bring peace, bring beauty, right? Bring equality. I mean, you can even keep it that basic. But I already know, from experience, and I've got that in those slides, right? That Libra on the 10th is connected with PR expertise, public relations, with social graces, social convening. And then also because that Venus, the ruler of the 10th, is in the 2nd of investing and support, that really she is that expert who also invests and supports feminist movements. That's something that I came up here. You could come up with something, with other things, and please, take your time with it and see really what makes sense. Really, you want to have some fun with this process. Why feminist movements? Because Venus in Aquarius is, right, Aquarius is very progressive. So we're talking progressive feminine Venus, right? We're seeing this Venus in Aquarius in Justin Trudeau's chart as well. Mercury in Aquarius, right? Innovative thinker, knows future trends. And oh my God, has she proven that? She things futuristically, basically the most fundamental way of describing that. So she embraces technology and she embraces these trends, and this is why she has been able to stay ahead of the times, like very, very helpful. And the North Node here, you know, if ever, whenever she gets stuck, right, I would advise her to keep that in mind. And that is really to take personal responsibility for her well-being, right? Because Capricorn is connected with, because she's got Capricorn North Node in the first, connected with personal responsibility, and her well-being would be the first house. It can also be for her personal development, right? Because that's also first house. And to step up and lead by example, which obviously she has done. Why? Because the first house is also connected with stepping into leadership as a more mature role model. Okay, so I hope that this makes sense and that it helps. Again, you want to play with that. Here's looking at Oprah's teacher archetype in a more simpler way, right, as a spiritual guide and a visionary. And then I've got here some couple slides on her movie productions, because it will give you an idea based on the third and 10th house, as I said, are both in my experience connected with what we are putting out there, right? 10th is definitely out there, right, what the public expects, especially for those people who are more influencers. So she's got The Wedding miniseries. She was an executive producer for that. How is that for Libra on the 10th? Beloved, Libra on the 10th, right? Their eyes were watching God. How is that for Pisces on the 3rd, right? Pisces, God, spirit creator, divine, building a dream. That's also basically the 3rd house, Pisces. Some of Oprah's books, The Wisdom of Sundays, very Piscean. Soul Conversations, very Piscean. In fact, Pisces 3rd house and then ruler Jupiter in Gemini, right? Soul, Pisces, Conversations, Gemini. The Wisdom and Refreshing, Healing, and Inspiring the Wisdom of Sundays, Journey to Beloved, Journal of Daily Renewal. Daily Renewal is very much that 6th house, Gemini, a journal, Gemini, okay? So hopefully you can see how this is maybe not as straightforward when you're just starting with this, but as you start looking at, maybe reading some biographies, I find I'm very, very captivated by seeing how people express their 3rd house in particular, and 10th house as well. You're gonna start picking up some, and obviously in your own example, right? You're gonna see some patterns here. So for example, Justin Trudeau, so I've done a different way rather than using that template. I'm literally just putting it here on the chart. And this is what if you're more visual, if you have Mercury in Pisces, or maybe not, you don't need that more logical and sort of structured way of seeing information, just simply put here information on close here to that 3rd house, right? Just literally fill it in here or even on the side as I've got here. So Libra 3H, what I've got here, Libra 3, 3rd house, Venus in Aquarius as the ruler of that Libra, right? That's that Venus, that feminist Venus in Aquarius. Little progressive feminine. You don't have to call it feminist, but it's progressive feminine, okay? Why progressive? Aquarius. Okay, so start with the basic and then see what would be the language that would make sense. This is one of the first, well, actually, I'm not sure whether it's the first. I think it's the Justin's Vision of Canada is one of the first sentences in his bio on the government's website, where it says Justin's Vision of Canada is a country where everyone has, and obviously we know this already, but just to show you how people really bring their story, their 3rd house story, very much at the forefront of their communication media. So where everyone has a real and fair chance to succeed, right? So how Libra is that, right? Really equality, fairness. A proud feminist, Justin appointed Canada's first gender balanced cabinet. And this is one of the big things that he's known for. That's a Libra on the 3rd. Equality is very important, but not just because a Libra on the 3rd, by the way, again, Venus in Aquarius, right? A little bit different than for Donald Trump. He's got also Libra there, but that Venus is in a more conservative Cancer, conjunct also conservative Saturn. Okay, so a little bit of a different dynamic where for Trudeau here, it is in the creative fifth, and also close to the sixth of work. So a little bit of a different vision of that feminine. And very importantly here, I believe the main, if not the only book, I believe, that he has written, or rather his book and his autobiography is titled Common Ground. How is that for Libra on the 3rd? It's very much about finding that common ground, right? Just an expression of how important that is. In a contrast, right? Not to say that every Libra in the 3rd is going to have the same expression. Obviously, Justin has figured some of those things out. Does he have ways to learn? Absolutely. But did he figure out that way of really, basically speaking Libra? Absolutely. Has he sometimes overdone that? And maybe where I know when I'm watching him, I can see sometimes that political correctness can become a little bit of a more automated for him. I don't know whether you've noticed that. And so with that Libra on the 3rd, I would actually advise him now, in his case, to continue to be more relatable and really make sure that he's relating to people, because that is the highest expression of Libra, continually being tuned in to what people are asking. Because sometimes when I listen to him, as much as I'm a fan, I can see how that political correctness has sort of become a little bit automated, and it's almost like a little bit overly rehearsed and very diplomatic, like if not overly diplomatic. Okay, so see how there's that shadowy expression. And on the other hand, we've got Donald Trump, who has written The Art of the Deal. So these are 2 Libra concepts in the key book that he's known for, written by with a ghostwriter. But The Art of the Deal, and this is the thing that we can most often hear him talk about, the deal maker, right? I can make deals. Let me see what deal I can make, and then he also talks about fairness, right? To the point of being annoying, really, because really, obviously, he's got his own version of that, right? We talked about that Sun Uranus, obviously his own version because it's Sun Uranus. So it's going to be a little, more extravagant than, and also very mercurial, right? With that Sun in Gemini, Uranus, and then opposition with the moon. So it's like literally flipping between these 2 ways of being. This is this opposition that he actually needs to, instead of flipping from one to the other, which is driving people nuts, right? And driving the world nuts. He really needs to be, this is the opposition. He needs to be bringing this together so that he embodies that safety in diversity. This is that in his cosmopolitan, to really feel safe in wherever he's coming from, rather than lying about it, apparently, or where his parents or grandparents are. And then also in his anti-establishment, right, way of, how he shares and how he communicates, also that he can, obviously, which he is, right, willing to come out publicly and keep the communication going, right, to speak in layman terms. But he's got that Libra here. So this is very important that one of the key words for Libra we have in the 3rd house is to consider the team, to basically work as a team, right, to cooperate, to really be, now he does do his own version of diplomacy, but I think because of these other elements we talked about, it is, driving people mad. Because it doesn't seem to have any structure or any, really logic to it. Obviously beauty and harmony are important to him. He used to manage that Miss Universe, so it'll be interesting to ask, how he brings that into why is that beauty important, and how has that story been inherited, okay? And then also, obviously, really understand here what would be the higher expression of, like looking at the things like political correctness and really manners and which obviously he's been called on, right? But at the same time, also being called for the shadowy, overly, right? Literally the things that, now as I'm recording this, he had recently had that meeting with Putin, right? That has been the now biggest, has, being talked about as the biggest mistake of his of his presidency. And what that really has been, the people pleasing, the very shadowy Libra. So he kind of fell into the trap of that overly people pleasing Libra. He didn't do that strong man necessarily. He hung out with a strong man, but he ended up falling into that third house, a lower expression, which is the people pleasing, right? And you know, all the basically the nicknames that he's been called because of that. So just to give an example, right, of how these different ways we can really work with that, and how if he really decide, and then plus that he didn't work as a team, that he's trying to do his communication, his meetings on his own. He does not have Aries in the third. He's got Aries in the 9, which is how his people perceive him, right? So people perceive his language as, and actually it's covered up here, but obviously you would see that he's got 9th house Aries in polarity, as authoritarian, as a dictator in training, and or maybe not needing that much training. But he is trying to do that, Libra, apparently. So anyway, long story short, The Art of the Deal is actually one of his, I think, the first book that he's most known for. It's very much in alignment with that Libra. Not only that it's in alignment, the art is ruled by Libra, deal making is ruled by Libra, but he also wrote it with somebody else. He also wrote Think Like a Billionaire, everything you need to know about success, real estate, and life. Think Big and Kick Ass. Interestingly, Think Big and Kick Ass, I don't think that many people know about, or Time to Get Tough. This is him trying to do that Mars right on the ascendant. But again, in my experience, when we really work this third house and the 10th house in terms of what we're putting out there more publicly, really seems to be more popular. Okay? Dalai Lama, so just again a different way of working with that template. Okay, so literally you can just here have the first step, you know, identifying that third house sign, and then second step, identifying the ruler of that sign, and just literally having a couple of keywords. And then for step number 3, I've got here planets in the third. Okay, so the cusp of the sign on the third, then the ruler of the third, which is the sun in Cancer here for him, and then Venus, Moon, Neptune in the third. Okay, so humor, creativity, right? He's a teacher of love, right? Yes, he's also a teacher of compassion, right? So it's not just a teacher of love. Why? Because he's got the ruler of the third is in Cancer, on his ascendant. So both of those things are important. And as a teacher of love, or messenger of love, if you like, if that's what you are more comfortable with, so you can also say messenger of love, he needs to be heard by whom? By messengers and or teachers of freedom and liberty and sovereignty. Now you may be wondering how relevant. That's very relevant, because big part of his purpose, of course, is to bring about, to fight for the sovereignty and autonomy of Tibet, right? So obviously everybody who is helping him with that mission, right, would be part of his ideal people, which basically would be people of Tibet. Okay. So his books, The Art of Happiness, how's that for Leo in the third? The Good Heart, my goodness, does Leo roll the heart and the goodness, right? The Compassionate Life. This is the ruler of the third in Cancer, right? That rules compassion, forgiveness, and open heart. Once again, very much Leo on the third. The heart of compassion. I mean, if I were creating these titles, I wouldn't be able to come up with them. How aligned and how conscious he is. Obviously, he has done this on his own, you know, but he's the heart of compassion. Leo, Cancer, and then a practical approach to a meaningful life. This would be that Moon Neptune in Virgo, because he's got Virgo in the third, planets in Virgo in the third. See how he's combining that in a subtitle? And then Essence of the Heart Sutra, once again, happiness, heart, love, all of the Leo aligned essence is Virgo. The Dalai Lama's Heart of Wisdom teachings, the art of happiness at work, right? That's Leo Virgo. The path to bliss. Bliss is that would be more of can be Cancer. It's typically connected more with Pisces and the 12th house. How to practice the way to meaningful life. I feel like that's more that Virgo. Again, the heart of essence and the great perfection. I mean, does he know his chart, right? With that Virgo in his third. So so that needs to be included. Now that also stands for healing and meditation, but my goodness, I probably wouldn't have, to be honest, included. I wouldn't have known, but he obviously, there is something called great perfection. So maybe we'll need to read that book and see what that's about. How to expand love, widening the circle of loving relationships. Would you expect that from Dalai Lama? Well, perhaps you would from somebody with Leo on the third and that ruler in Cancer, and then Venus in the third as well. So the Book of Joy, how Leo is that? Lasting happiness in a changing world. Yeah, I'm not joking. Those are all the titles by Dalai Lama. And Marianne Williamson, who also has Leo on the third, and interestingly enough, also Sun in Cancer. In her case, it's closer to the second house and aligned with Uranus and close to Venus. She also has Mercury in Leo and Pluto. So it's a little bit of a different story here. She has Pisces, right, a spiritual teacher, an intuitive Pisces on the midheaven, so that's important. And she has, right, Jupiter, ruler of that 10th, is in Taurus here. So the key thing here that I wanted to make a note of this, which is what I'm always very compelled to check, again, what has she written and how aligned that is. So apparently, obviously, we don't write everything. You know, I find it's not like 100% of everything that we write and put out there is going to be aligned with the third, but I found like a great percentage of what we do is going to be either aligned to the first, to the third, and or the 10th. And, you know, it can absolutely brings the elements of the sun, moon, and the ascendant, which we have already found is relevant, but the most coherent, and if you like, most successful publications really seem to be speaking that third house language. So Marianne's book, the mega bestseller, is always first mentioned as A Return to Love. Return to Love. How is that for a Leo on the third? A return to love is considered a must-read of the new spirituality, right? There is that Pisces on the 10th, spirituality. So she's a teacher of spirituality and in a more public way, right? And then she lists other books as well. Law of Divine Compensation. That's Pisces on the 10th. Everyday Grace, Pisces. Return to Prayer, Pisces. Healing the Soul of America, Pisces, Cancer, right? 21 Spiritual Lessons for Surrendering, Pisces. But Your Wait Forever, I feel like, is that Pluto, right? It's about purging. There is here a message of purging some toxicity. So it's interesting that it is connected with the weight management. Probably that ruler of the third, I think Sun is in the first, close to the second. Enchanted Love. You know, similar to Dalai Lama there, the mystical power of intimate relationships. So mystical power can be very much Pisces, but I feel like it's that Mars in Aries, interestingly enough. So which is very strong in Scorpio. So she's tapped into that. It's actually the ruler of the 11th, the ultimate impact she is here to make. Okay, and then Tears to Triumph, the spiritual journey from suffering to enlightenment. It's like she's picked almost every single word here that's Pisces. So she's definitely really tapped into really probably with the help of her publisher. So this is what I found is very, very helpful. If you can tap into also what your 10th and the 11th even ultimately, you know, your mission requires, but it really starts in the third. Okay, so hopefully you can see how it's relevant in terms of the books that are most known and that people's really messages are most known for. Even when, you know, she's teaching about spiritual stuff, people really get that. And even though apparently if she is maybe different in her personal life, I haven't read a lot about her, but I've just kind of seen a little bit. Apparently she is not maybe as Leo in her personal life in terms of what people know and see her as. but that is what is advised for her to bring through that frequency of love. Okay, and Richard Branson with the Virgo on the 3rd and Mercury in Leo in the 12th. His books, Losing My Virginity. I mean, hello, Virgo on the 3rd. Would I have known? I probably wouldn't have guessed, to be honest. And I've shared this in the past that he would have written about his virginity. But it's interesting that it's losing it, which is connected with the 12th, right? 12th house is where we need to kind of surrender things. And obviously the Leo is also connected with fun. So how I've survived, had fun, and made a fortune doing business my way. 14 lessons on making it to the top while having fun and staying green. Leo, right? Mercury in Leo, ruler of the 3rd, and staying green, which is that of Virgo on the 3rd. Like a virgin, once again, secrets they want to teach you at business school. Like a virgin, Virgo on the 3rd, right? One of his books, key books, Secrets, 12th house. Finding my virginity, apparently, there's an obsession with that. The Virgin Way, obviously, it's the name of his business. And if it's not fun, it's not worth doing. And then apparently he's had the Playboy interview, which is also that Mercury in Leo, a ruler of the 3rd, and I've got here his teacher archetype, just in a more simplified way of looking at that Virgo on the 3rd, basically that Mercury in Leo in the 12th house. And then Branson saying basically when we look at people's messages saying we must work hard to change all of this. So he definitely, there's with the Virgo on the 3rd talking about work, our work, and efficiencies and or basically really significant, something that is working for us, and that Virgo on the 3rd can definitely, they can speak about working hard in a more coherent way than anybody else, right, with any other sign can. Perhaps maybe I would say Capricorn and Virgo can really do that, and they do need to talk about it, okay? Other people, for example, Pisces, 3rd house, talking about hard work, probably can sound a little bit off. So I hope that makes sense. And then he also talks about how he's passionate about many things, but conserving our planet and its species is a high priority. So he always makes a point of, my message and my mission is very Virgo, like about conservation, preservation, right? Green earth and so on. Okay. And ta-da! We do arrive here, looks like at the very end of the presentation. So basically just for the end, I just have the slides here for you that you can use to work on this on your own. And I hope that this served. Again, you can use the simple slides, and you can also use the that map, in whatever it is that serves you more. The next steps obviously will be to identify your magnetic marketing map keywords using the attached templates as per the shared examples. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next week for your video class number 6. Thank you for listening and participating, and I look forward to connecting with you once again for video number 6. Bye for now.